everything we call life is an experience of thought. So if you believe that you are making the decisions, the choices, then your experience of that thought process is what we call the world. And what he's saying here is, if you were to ask, if you were to listen to the inner voice, the inner guide, then you would recognize there is a different choice. And then your experience would follow that line. Whenever I get really, really, really confused in trying to understand, the one thought that brings me back to center is the recognition that what I really want is to know that I am loved. And when I step back from that, all of the garbage, it's there. And I know. But the interesting thing is that when I know that I am loved, I know that everyone is loved. And that's how I know it's real. Because it doesn't have anything to do with the I. It's the universal I. If I defend myself, I am attacked. But in defenselessness, I will be strong. And I will learn what my defenses hide. And what is it that all of our defenses hide? It's the same for all of us.
Guilt.
Judgment.
Absolutely that.
Guilt.
Pure and simple guilt.
Yep.
It's very interesting. I'm just having this little conversation, and Brother is saying, ask the group if they would help me let go of the idea of sin. Will you? He says, it's only by doing it together that it will happen. I remember the old saying, I can't believe my eyes. What could be more true? I had an interesting experience in that regard one time, Dan. One of the first times I can remember when he said, when he intimated that we were all in touch with everything, that all of the thoughts that go on in consciousness. I just went into a meditation and thought, well, I'll just let go of my thoughts of resisting that. And it was like this cacophony of sounds and voices and you couldn't make out, I couldn't make out anything. It was said, and then all of a sudden it hit me. Just step back from that fear of having another mind invade my mind. And all of these voices began to slow down. And I could hear each one. I could stop and listen to this one, and then hear this one, then hear that one. And they were all perfectly loving. And nothing happened except that thought, choice in my mind, just to let that be. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
We are the voice for God. You know that. And there's nothing mystical about that. Okay, one last thing. He's encouraging me to offer to all of you the opportunity at any time to speak to him or bring something to him that you feel is beyond your understanding. He says, I can ask you for help and I can offer you my help. These are the times that it's so helpful for us to have the background of the Course and be able to recall in our awareness that this whole thing that we call death is just, it's part of our story.
Your words last week, something about death is just a thought, helped, you know. I know I'm looking at this unworldly, you know, I'm still seeing us as we aren't, you know, I'm still seeing us as, I'm not seeing the real world, obviously, but so grateful that I have a glimmer that there is something better, something different, something more.
And there is the part of you, honey, that is seeing the real world. It is seeing Laurel exactly as she is now and has always been.
And she's seeing that too because she's not separate, right? You know, we all love her.
Yes. Well, let's consciously keep her with us. Consciously acknowledge her presence, consciously acknowledge her love. I was struck this morning as I was doing today's lesson, which, as most of you know, is just a review. So what I normally do is go back and do the real lesson, the more lengthy one. And I was struck as I was doing that, how it seemed so strongly to speak of Laurel. And I can't even tell you why. But I'd share that with you so that as we go back, if you would like to do that, as we go back to the lesson, and let's read it with that in mind.
Everything we touch takes on a shining light that blesses and that heals. At one with God and with the universe, we go our way rejoicing.
Excuse me, it was right there that I just had this sense, this feeling of Laurel walking with us. Is there another way for us to, quote-unquote, see God than to see it in one another? To see Him or her in one another? The feeling of God is such an abstract idea in the mind of the ego consciousness. And yet, just to have the intention to see God in someone, I draw that feeling into a more specific feeling for me. And as I have said before, that's all it seems to take, is just the intention to do that. Believe it or not, I've even done that with the Donald. And it works. It works beautifully.
Well, today we see only the loving and the lovable. Who would we leave out of that?
Who would we?
Yeah.
Indeed. Unless I leave myself out. The thing is that when we include ourselves, we automatically have included everyone. And unfortunately, that's usually the last awareness that we come to, because it'll seem to be easier to see God in everyone, even those that we argue against the most, before we stop and say, wait, let me see God, the only place in truth that I can see Him. And that is in myself. Can you? Are you willing to? You can. Of course you can. But are you willing to? Sometimes I understand I'm not. Sometimes I just feel my ego rebelling. But thank God, Brother is always there, and he's always willing to say, it's okay, I see Him for you. How do we restore someone to life? How do we see them in such a way that restores them to life? I don't believe that He is just giving us an idle exercise when He asks that we do that. So how would you think would be the most appropriate way for you to see someone like that? Could you, if you ask the God Self to see you in the light of loving, would there be anyone that you couldn't see that way? Over and over and over again. The key to every form of healing that he speaks about in physical or spiritual healing is just see yourself at one with God. In this silly dream of separation, wouldn't it seem as though that were a simple thing to do? I mean, no one sitting at this table would ever say that they wish to be separate. And yet it seems to be such second nature to us. The inclination to move in separate ways and think in terms of separate thoughts. The closer we come, dear friends, the more apparent it becomes that this gap, this distance that seems to exist between ourselves and God is nothing. It is a meaningless thought, and therefore it is nothing. It doesn't matter that we seem to accept the truth and then fall away from the truth and then accept it again and forgive and then judge. And don't be troubled by all of that nonsense. Because that's all it is. It's a silly thought. And it has no power, absolutely no power at all. We cannot be separate. We cannot help but be the presence of the love of God. That's it. Have you ever done that? To take an allotted amount of time, a half an hour, whatever, and just keep telling yourself, I am spending this with God, to just reinforce that intention over and over again. I rest in God. I am part of God. God is with me here. Whatever is meaningful to you, just to become accustomed to the feeling of being with God. Yeah, what's it going to take for us to accept that? Am I ever going to look around the world and find a justification for it? No, that's not what I've made the world to do. Could I look around this table and find the justification for it? Yes, I could, because I trust you all. I love you all.
I come here to drink of those waters.
Yes. So maybe we could be bold enough to step outside the footprints that we've left in Tom's dust storm. These are all wonderful examples of what the Course teaches us are the rewards, so-called, of fear and judgment. How they become so pervasive. They consume us, literally. They create a persona that is unlike even the ego persona. So it's no wonder that when we're asked to serve on juries and so forth, that we become immersed in a perception of ourselves that is just terribly fearful, terribly fearful. Share with you an experience I had then, earlier or late last week. I was, whatever day we were studying lesson 137, and I was kind of focused on the line where he tells us that healing is when you make the choice to be one again. And it just occurred to me, I really don't know what that means. I've never had an experience that I can recall of oneness. How do I relate to that? So I asked, and I also mentioned, I'm sure I've asked this before. And he said, well, it takes a while for us to come to the place where oneness no longer seems to be threatening. And we can open our mind to what the actual experience might be. He said, and so let's do that today. And I felt exactly what he had said. I felt, oh my God, do I really want this? Do I really want to go there? Finally, okay, let's do that. And he said, well, we begin. This is a very simple process. We begin by your reminding yourself that you are not a body. And your reluctances before to resist the experience of oneness have primarily occurred because you were approaching them from the perception of being a body. And bodies cannot join. So I said, you remind yourself that you are not a body. You are spirit. Now, let's relate spirit to light. Because light is synonymous in our teaching with truth. So you relate the feeling of who you are as spirit to light. And as he's saying this, I'm drifting off into my meditation. And he said, now, as you accept the experience of truth, of light being truth, you can begin to feel, and as he said this, there were lights everywhere, just everywhere. And they were just floating free. And I just felt a euphoric sense that a light would come right up to me and flow right through my light and out again and go away a little bit and then start to come back. Then another would do the same. But you could just, and he said, you can now feel the joy, or what you are feeling now is the joy of not feeling a need to resist your natural joining. And it was just a feeling of being so free, so joyful. And I had no trouble at all imagining what joining oneness could be, thinking of myself as light. And then when I stop and think about it, I think of all of the times that he refers to us as light. Anyway, I offer that to you if you'd like to try it. I found it to be an amazing experience. And what he's saying to us is that even in our ego perception of ourself, our God self is present. So we have the option. Which one are we going to listen to? There is a way of being in the world that does not seem to be of the world. That's where we're going. That's living the Course. To me, that's what it means. How difficult it is, even after all these years of studying, to hear him tell us that we are the teachers of God and that we can bring the light. The light is with us. And all we have to do is see it ourselves to make it visible. The interesting thing to me has always been, and when I allow myself to feel the oneness with God, even though before I couldn't define what that oneness was, I could never feel guilty myself while I was trying to feel at one with God. Isn't that interesting that it just falls, that part of it just falls away? Those were such, what appeared at the time, those were such tumultuous times for the course, most course groups. Because on the one hand, here we are studying that judgment of any kind is totally useless. And we have master teacher in Wisconsin who is wanting to publish his own, rewrite in parts and publish his own Course in Miracles. And Ken rising up in arms saying, no way this is going to happen. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a court ruling appears saying, sorry guys, but by the rule of law, there's no way that this course can be copyrighted. And it was such, to me, it was such a marvelous illustration of what the Course teaches. Yes, we're talking serious miracles here. Anyway, as I'm watching the news, particularly the last couple of days, with all of the upset that's going on with the refugees on the Mexican border, it becomes again so apparent how easy it is to polarize. And you hear one person after another expressing either the opinion that it's absolutely justified or there's no way to justify it. And it's almost like watching the little hate meter as it wobbles back and forth from one party to the next. And I'm reminded that how difficult it truly is for something that we care about deeply to be forgiven, truly forgiven. And yet, if we are to do more than just transfer hate, see it shifts from one place to another, isn't this a marvelous opportunity for us to do that? And then I'm reminded, this group right here, who better is equipped to step back, literally to step away from all of the angst and the anger, and remind ourselves we only have the opportunity to see another child of God. Nothing more, nothing less than that. So how will we do that without forgiveness? Total, genuine forgiveness. How will we do that? I think it's impossible. So I wanted to ask you, before we get into the lessons that I'd like to take a look at today, I wanted to ask you if there's anyone here who has any reluctance for all of us to join together take a stand on what's happening. And the stand that I would recommend is that we collectively remember to invite our God self into our mind at each and every opportunity that we feel called upon to make a judgment of any kind. And to look at this so-called crisis, and then by the ego's terms, I'm sure it is a crisis, but to look at and recognize that it's a marvelous opportunity, truly a marvelous opportunity for all of us. I also understand that there are times when I'm watching it and I can feel what I'm saying to you now, and there are other times when it just seems to go out the window, and there I am in judgment. Yet every time that does happen, and I go within and say, I'm sure sorry, I blew it again, Brother says, never forget, the only two options you have are to see the truth or to recognize that nothing is happening. And that's such a relief to know that I can screw up 20 times a day, 100 times a day. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because our story is still a story. And beneath it all is the truth and the love of God, which we are never going to change. It's never going to be in doubt. Nothing can ever happen to it because it is the will of God. I don't believe there is any given way, so to speak, that is better than another given way, as long as we take whichever one to the God self and say, here is where I am in this moment. Here is where I am. Meet me here.
That's the piece for me, Tom, right there, is meet me here, because in meeting me here is loving me even with this reaction.
Exactly.
And so I don't crucify myself. There's the opportunity.
That is the opportunity.
And I'm finding that process challenging, to be in the sweat of the reaction and asking to create the space to even love myself here.
A couple of days ago, I was in one of those smits, and I went to Brother, and I said, what the hell am I going to do? I'm just constantly bouncing in and out of this awareness. And he says, each time you do, remember, and again he reminded me about, you're either experiencing the love of God or nothing's happening. But then he said, look, each time, just remind yourself, if it is at any given moment, or ever has been in your past, your intention to love your brother, then just remember this. It is always possible to love the dreamer if you disregard his dream. Now, what does that really mean for us? To disregard his dream? Isn't that what we all struggle with? Isn't that what we struggle with when we say, but wait a minute, I'm in and out, I'm back and forth, I'm never consistent. We're struggling with just that one issue. Who cares? If it's not real, who cares how many times we bounce back and forth? The only thing that's important is that in one of those moments, when we're bouncing off the wall, we run into God.
Thank God.
And it's over. But we make such a big deal out of it. We are so accustomed to the rewards of guilt. When I look at what's going on, and I don't care who it is in the government that seems to be creating such problems for these refugee people, I just feel myself start to rise up. How many times have I arisen to that bait? And how many times will I? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Unless I have changed that story into something real. It doesn't matter. Is this a novel approach or what?
Is this nothing real can be threatened?
Can you hear that? Nothing real can be threatened.
Yeah, right.
Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Not once you get it right. We don't need to go there. Why do you suppose Brother prefaced all of this information, coming to Helen by telling her this? This is what we're going to do here. We're going to learn that nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists. That's what we're going to do. How many times do we remember that when we judge and we get angry with ourselves for judging, that's the whole purpose of the judgment. But now, look, ask yourselves another question, because this is key. This is really, really key. Could you live with yourself without feeling guilty?
They have to be capital S.
There aren't too many of us who can answer that question that we could, in fact, look forward to a life of not judging ourselves. Yeah, how about that? What grander gift could a father have given us than a bridge to get from where we think we are to where we actually guaranteed? And how many times do I use it? How many times do I, when I have a problem or when something is in my face, do I say, God self, you better handle this. I don't think I can do it the way I need to do it right now. How about you? Bring us back to where we began this conversation. Is there something, anything at all, that still is in your mind that would not allow you to see the Holy Child of God in both the refugee and the government officials? So when the question arises in your mind, can I truly forgive? The first thing that should follow that question is, am I willing to forgive myself? Because I am the only one. I am the only one that I can forgive and that it makes any sense to try to forgive. So is there any reason at all that we can't bring healing to this situation that we're talking about? This isn't about being able to love Donald Trump despite what he's done. This isn't about that. This is about each one of us being able to look inside and say, am I willing, just this, am I willing to see the child of God right here, right now, just that? You only have to do one thing. Ask the God self to see it for you. To see with your perception being undone. In other words, each of us has decided how we're going to see this story unfold. And that's what we call perception. That just plays on and on. But the God self can take that view and show you how to see, for instance, that the child who seemed to be abandoned was actually experiencing an opportunity to recognize that he was completely loved. How would I know that? How could I ever arrive at that kind of a conclusion? I couldn't. There's no way. But if I could see through the eyes that recognized that the body, this perception, this world that I see functioning as me, was only functioning as a character that I have created and had nothing to do with me. Now I'm free.
So would that be a holy instant?
That certainly would be a holy instant.
At that instant, would I be in this body?
Maybe, maybe not. It's irrelevant. The body will always serve whatever purpose we give it, Raj. So we can have it or not have it, it's irrelevant. In fact, I am even cautioned. Sometimes my feeling that I should be willing to give up the body, I don't know. That's the simple truth. I don't know what's best for me. I don't know if it would be best for me to let go of my body right now or to continue to function within it. Quite honestly, I don't know. The thing that distracts us so much is that we think when we say, just by accepting what is, that means accepting all of the strife, the pain, the sorrow, and so forth.
But
That's not the point. If the mind is in acceptance of itself, if the mind is in going through the process of accepting itself, there will be no pain. There will be no suffering. There's no conflict. That's the only mind there is. You see? But the ego says, well, how could I be accepting of all of that? That's what I'm trying to get rid of. And the point is, that if you were accepting yourself, you would be rid of it. It's only because the mind is in conflict with itself that it sees these things we call a world. Who is there to attack us if we accepted ourselves? I want to share something with you in that regard. A couple of mornings ago in my meditation, I had the fleeting thought kind of pass through my mind. My goodness, isn't there something I could do that would seemingly overcome all of these tremendous odds of everything that needs to be fixed? That just looks like an impossible situation. And I hear Brother say, now relax. And he didn't say anything else. But I began to feel coming into my mind the experience of the universe. I'm going to call it the universe, mind of God, whatever. Before the Big Bang, when everything was just absolutely whole and peaceful and normal. Everything was perfect. And it was like, there was this, what the Course calls, tiny mad idea. Just a little gremlin of a thought popped through. And everything shattered. Everything just shattered into a million billion pieces. And I watched all this, and I became aware that I have the choice and the opportunity to be on either side of that moment. And that was so profound because it really taught me that no matter how complex, how complicated, how overwhelmingly powerful and conflictual this world seems to be, there is a place in my mind that remembers it before all of that happened. And so suddenly I realized I didn't need to deal with all of this. I only needed to deal with one thing, one idea. Which side of that moment do I want to be on? But it was like if I watched it happen in reverse, it all came back together and there was nothing but this beautiful, harmonious, perfectly loving thought. And it was all right there, and I could be here or I could be here.
Is this release field?
I'm sure that must be exactly what he experienced at that moment. The field, yes. There is a field. I didn't realize it, but when I had this experience in my meditation, I remembered later that I had watched a Nova program, just probably the one where everything seemed to go that way. And at the time that I watched it, thought went through my mind like, why do that? When we awaken, what are we going to awaken to? A bright new world? Are we going to awaken to the world that's always been? You know what the tiny man idea is, incidentally?
Yeah.
It's so simple. Who am I?
Yeah. When we decided.
How can you ask, who am I? You can't. What's the one thing you have to know above all else? It's who and what you are. You can't escape that. None of us can. So when that one tiny man idea, I wonder who I am. In all of this, I wonder who I am. That's a tiny mad idea.
Yeah. The self.
I wonder how many times more complex I make this whole awakening process. Just think for one moment, what would happen if we could convince ourselves not to judge ourselves for screwing up? Just that. That's all we have to do. Nothing's wrong. Well, but could I do that? Well, who do you think screwed up by thinking there was something wrong? Was that somebody else? I said, let's ask ourselves again the one question of healing that we need to ask. Am I willing now to see the Holy Child of God wherever I look? In both the refugees and the government, wherever, just to see that. Is there something that still persists that would keep us from doing that? I don't think so, not in this moment. Or perhaps if we could do that, there won't be any more.
No problem.
Just joy.
Well, why not? I can remember early on Brother saying to me, when I said, it's so much easier for me to forgive everybody else than to forgive myself. And he said, well, you understand why. It's because you know it wasn't them. So we do. That's the only person we ever need to forgive, obviously, is ourselves. The only person we ever truly need to learn to love is ourselves. When you've all had the experience, when you're feeling loved, there isn't anyone that you don't love. But when you are feeling out of sorts with yourself, there isn't anyone that you do love. So everything becomes a projection of this inner character that we have created a world to sustain. And we have, we've created an entire world to house this character and to make sure that his every belief is validated. Yep, we've done that. I think this would all be a lot easier for us to accept if we weren't trying to come at it through the understanding of our separateness. If we were reading this with the awareness that our oneness was our reality, then what you see and what I see is not amazing to be the same, because we are the same. We share the same mind. We share the same awareness. So again, it seems to be extraordinary that you could see and I could see the same tree. And yet, if we believed that we were parts of the same being, it no longer is quite so extraordinary. Can anything exist without the observer? Things don't exist in a void. Everything is a product of our observation and purpose.
The observer itself is the organizer.
Yes. It has no other meaning or no other reason to exist.
Things are exactly the way you want them. And I'm going, really, Tom? How do I want this?
Yeah. This is a real challenge, and it's what I was hoping we could talk about. The last several lessons, you've noticed that theme, so to speak, runs through them. And it's like, I think today's lesson was, I choose the joy of God instead of this or instead of pain. How do you feel when you just choose, or you have the notion of just choosing the joy of God and nothing really concrete seems to happen as a result of that choosing? That's what you're talking about. You're saying, I'm in a good attitude, I have a good frame of mind, but nothing seems to change. The contractors still seem to do their thing. Well, the issue is, are we really changing our mind? Or are we just understanding to a greater depth?
Well, if I go on what it appears out in the world, I must not be, because the storyline is
If the world still looks the same, then we haven't changed our mind. Because the world is, in fact, a mirror for our state of mind. So, if it remains constant, so is our belief.
So the only checkup I have for a report card is to try another contractor and see what happens.
I don't know, honey. Not necessarily, I wouldn't think. I mean, that would not necessarily be the answer.
Well, it's just kind of aggravating little way for it to show up, you know?
What do you expect to show up? We are still attempting to adjust the effect of a world whose primary purpose is to prove that there's something wrong, because that is the general consensus of our consciousness, that there is something wrong. Sin is real. Guilt is real. There is something wrong with us. That's what makes our world the way we see it. And so we're trying to change that without changing the thought that sin is real. In the simplest way of explaining it, that's what's happening. We still want to make sin and guilt real. We don't want to have to deal with the literal changing of that belief, while at the same time we want the effects of that belief to change. So what do we do? What's the answer? How do you bring about a real change in your belief that sin is real? The very thing that's happening for you now is the way you do it. You step back when it doesn't seem to change, and you call in the God self and you say, help me to see this in a way that helps me now to change what I believe. Help me to forgive myself for allowing this to be exactly as it's always been. Can you be okay with that? Can any of us be okay with that? Or does that seem to negate the reason that we're studying this course? How many of us, bottom line, really want to change the story of our life by studying what we're studying?
I would rather just get what I want the way I want it without any negative consequences, because this is hard.
That's what I'm saying, yes.
Yeah.
We want to change the story without changing what made the story what it is.
Simply do this. Be still and lay aside all thoughts of what you are and what God is, all concepts you have learned about the world, all images you hold about yourself. Empty your mind of everything it thinks it is either true or false, or good or bad, of every thought it judges worthy, and all the ideas of which it is ashamed. Hold on to nothing.
Now, stop right there for a moment. Do you understand what he's saying? This is what we have to release in order to get or have a new concept of what it is that we really want. Because based upon our old concepts of who we are and what we lack in our story, we keep asking for the same thing over and over and over again. But we have to let go of all of these parameters that we have already established as what is necessary to make us feel okay, to make us feel whole. Here, this is really important. It's more than giving up the judgment of ourselves. It's giving up all of the self-concept that seems to make this self the real self.
So when you have a problem like this, I mean, it's not a problem, but when you have this situation, then you sit back and do nothing. You say, God, you take care of it. Well, I get this little voice says to do this, so I do that.
So you do that. But are you really listening? I'm not just talking to you, obviously. Are you really listening to what that little voice is saying? Are you listening to the little voice saying, let me make your story a lot better? Or are you listening, are you hearing the voice say, there's another way for you to see this story? When I choose the joy of God instead of pain, instead of the world that I see. That's not simply choosing within my belief structure. That is choosing outside my belief structure, which would hopefully tear down my belief structure entirely.
I don't know. I was happy through the whole process. I just can't.
Therein lies the problem too, honey, quite honestly. Quite honestly, because we take advantage of our knowledge of how the game is played. In other words, we choose a better story, and that makes us feel better. But it doesn't really change our mind. It doesn't get us past what makes this story a story.
Okay, I don't have a thing.
There is nothing within our world, changing anything within our world, that is going to make the reality or bring us closer to the reality and the truth of who we are. You are recognizing the oneness with God.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's not part of our story. That's what gets us so messed up. We keep wanting to choose a different variation of the story instead of allowing ourselves to settle into and feel that oneness with the all that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the key, again, that we're all missing is really being clear about what it is that we want. We will not change the story of the reality of our truth by changing the world that we see. That's just exchanging one story for another story. How many of us feel comfortable, willing to say, at this point, I'm just willing to let the whole story go. I don't want any part of it. But you see, until we come to that place, it's not going to happen.
I'm not sure I'm willing to let it all go, but I am willing to let it be as it is. Is that pretty much the same thing, or is that?
In the greatest depth of our awareness, Jim, that the way it is the will of God. The way we see it is probably not.
But it's our perception, yeah.
So it's a matter of whether or not we're trying to change our perception or to let it go.
How does this story, I think it was Helen Chuckman, yeah, she was guided to get the right coat. The right coat is right over there.
Right.
How would that be a lesson in what you're talking about?
That's difficult to say because I'm trying to analyze how you see that story.
I see it as changing the world. She was looking for this coat, she's not finding it, and then she got some help to get the coat. So she's got a better world.
Actually, in that context, it's almost no lesson at all.
Isn't it a lesson in trust?
How would we do that, Brian?
Well, if she asked the Spirit to help her find the right coat, and she got the right coat, then isn't that a lesson in trust to tell her?
In that moment, that's what she needed
Yeah.
for her trust. Yes.
It wasn't about the coat.
It was not about the
trust.
coat. Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
It's never about the issue, the specifics, the form or the physicality, let's say, the manifestation of what happens in the world. It's never about that. That's automatic. It's always about what it is that we truly want and how much we are willing to let go of what the ego wants to accept Christ's vision.
Would it be accurate to say that whatever's going on is Christ's vision?
In truth, whatever is going on is Christ's vision.
Not my perception of it, but what is
Right.
going on.
What is actually going on. And that's what Brother means when he says right at the beginning of the course, nothing real can be threatened. But the second part of that is nothing unreal exists.
And isn't the unreal the script, all the scripts, and the stage, all the stages? So that's not really what's truly going on.
It's not what's going on, but it is what's going on in the ego's perception.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, when we begin to get a clear picture of the distinction between those two, we can come up with a better idea of what it is that we need to choose. And that is to choose for the God self, not for the outcome of the story, but to choose for the God self.
It has to do with cause and effect, doesn't it? If the cause is Christ's vision, the effect is a better world. But if the cause is ego vision, the effect is a crummy world.
It seems pretty simple, doesn't it?
Yeah, it seems.
I think what's going on for some of us is that we have presupposed what a better world would look like, and it didn't come out quite that way. And so
that's always it, Jim. That's always it. But unfortunately, we don't seem to learn very quickly. We keep choosing the same thing.
We do it again
over
and
over
again.
There's this part of my mind that says, and it's larger than it used to be, please do not give me what I think that I want.
Yes, and that's why we study all this. That's why understanding becomes key to the ego's perception.
Can I ask if that becomes then a barrier in my own thinking?
It does.
A block?
It does.
Yeah.
It's another block.
It seems to me like this is just all is a reflection of forgiveness. Because forgiveness requires communication with the Holy Spirit, and that's the avenue to Christ's vision.
I would agree with you entirely, Roger. It's the difficulty that we have in getting there that poses all of the issues for us.
Doesn't it boil down always to what we think we are before it can be resolved with what we want?
Yes. But we don't make a distinction, unfortunately. And when we ask from that ego perspective, it's within that context that we seem to receive. And therein lies the issue. That's why changing our mind seems to be so difficult. Because we're trying to change our mind from within the awareness of the ego mind. And it's not going to happen. It's not there. So what is the answer? Now keep in mind, the other part, the other element that's so crucial in this is understanding that God's will for us is perfect happiness. And I happen to believe that whether or not I'm happy with my ego or whether I'm happy with my spirit, God's will for me is perfect happiness. So, how do I introduce that element into my awareness, into my choosing awareness, and allow it to work for me? Okay, in the most simple way possible, take a look at our political situation that's happening right now. Look at the contentious atmosphere that exists within this, whether it's the refugee situation or the Supreme Court nominee, whatever it is. What would it take for you to be perfectly comfortable in allowing someone else's choice and perception to be perfectly okay?
Trust.
Knowing it isn't real.
Entirely that. How could you not, or how could you, if you didn't first believe that it wasn't real? Otherwise, you're going to come up with a sacrifice. So, how many of us are at a place where we can step back and say, the world that I see is not real, and I'm okay with that?
If you look at paragraph 8, it sounds like you follow this process of letting go, letting go, letting go. Without filling the vacuum with the Holy Spirit, you can arrive at enlightenment.
See, Roger, just one small adjustment in your thinking. It's like you say, without filling the vacuum. There is no vacuum. Within the one mind, there is nothing but what we call God. There is nothing but awareness. There is no vacuum. We're eliminating the perceptual blocks to what we think is there that blocks the reality of seeing what's really there. It's a substitution. Perception simply substitutes one idea for the truth. What is the holy relationship, incidentally? What would the holy relationship be?
A verification.
It's the assumption of the oneness. That is the holy relationship, which sounds like an oxymoron, and it is, because the one is equal to the every, the whole, the all. It's getting the perception out of the way to allow that to stand clear in our mind. Now, a lot of this becomes very hypothetical when we start to get into what we're talking about now, and it doesn't really help us a whole lot. What does help us is to try on every occasion that we have an opportunity, is to try to allow our sense of acceptance of our oneness to become a reality. And it's that we always ask the God Self how to find, how to see. Our granddaughter was just here visiting, and she's only 14, but she's decided that she wants to go into politics. And I said, with all of the contentiousness and everything that's going on in our world today, I want that. She said, well, that's the quickest way I can think of to make a change in the world. I said, well, while you're trying to think about changing somebody's perception in the world, think about this. Will you do that more effectively by becoming one with them or trying to convince them of your point of view? In other words, separating from them. And she got it. What single thing would make you happiest in this world? Would it be to know that you could exit this world? Exactly what we were reading. Letting go of all of those thoughts. All of them. Emptying your mind. Would that make you happiest? That's what the Course is asking us to do. So if that's not going to make us happy, maybe we ought to figure out why. Because now we're simply at odds with what we're being taught is necessary and what we're willing to accept as what we want. Is there something else that would make you happy? That's the question.
Do you believe we can exit this world without fulfilling our special function?
No, I don't. But I believe that we are never going to approach fulfilling our special function until we finally recognize that is what's going to give us what we want.
Yes.
It's thinking you know what you want and recognizing down deep you're never going to have it.
That would be despair.
Yeah.
That's despair. You see, that's the ego's game. That is the condition of the world we're making now. We have everything exactly as we want it.
I think that's what would be true perception.
True perception.
Yes. Good point. Very good point. That's where we have to start, with what we want. We have to be able to step back and say, I don't know what would make me happy, but I do know that I really, really want to be loving. I really want to be peaceful. These things I want. So now I can say to the God Self, show me how to do it. You see, we're just flipping it. Instead of allowing the ego to set the parameters, we're saying, this is, as Tom was saying, seeing the actor behind the character and knowing that the actor wants to be loving, wants to be peaceful, wants to be happy, just doesn't know how to be, has gotten all of these other things in the way. So we've got something purposeful that we can ask for. We can say, we can have our God conversation. Say, show me how to do this. See, he's not excluding the body. He's not excluding our current illusory experience. Addressing exactly where we are, what our belief is now, and saying, if those thoughts would change, everything in your world would follow suit. We're not asked all of a sudden to let go of everything we've ever believed. We are asked to have enough faith and trust to recognize that we don't know what we want, and to be able to ask for what we do. Don't put unreasonable expectations on yourself. Well, for me, I want to say to all of you, thank you, because you are such a blessing. Truly, truly, truly. Thank you.